Hello and welcome to The Other Way, a lifestyle podcast exploring uncommon, unconventional, or otherwise alternative approaches to health, spirituality, identity, work, and life. I'm your host, Kasha. I'm the founder of InFlow, a women's wellness brand that designs intentional products to help women reconnect to their unique cyclical rhythms and find a balance between being and doing. This podcast is an extension of my mission with InFlow. Here, you'll find interviews with inspiring humans, trailblazers, researchers, spiritual teachers, and more, all on the journey of doing things the other way. Now, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Other Way. Today's guest is a very special and beautiful soul. I am speaking with Krista Tarantino on the wisdom and the gift of the postpartum period. Krista is a registered nurse who specializes in postpartum wellness, and she is also an international board-certified lactation consultant. On today's episode, we are rooting deep into our wisdom as women, as womb keepers, and for many of us as mothers or mothers-to-be. We are going to be talking about what can we learn from our ancestors around postpartum health and care. We're going to be diving into the science behind breastfeeding, the energetics of breast health on an emotional and physiological level, as well as the wisdom of our bodies. We'll be spending quite a bit of time covering breastfeeding, of course. We're going to be talking about the connection between our breasts and our hearts, our breasts and our detox system. This is relevant for preconception or postpartum for all stages of women's health. But we're also going to be covering a variety of breastfeeding specific topics, such as should we be feeding our babies on demand, the power and the science behind co-sleeping from an evolutionary point of view, and we're going to be covering some topics around some of the struggles or navigating some of the struggles that some women may face with breastfeeding. So, although we cover a lot of topics in the realm of breastfeeding and women's health, I feel like above all, this conversation feels like a conversation of feminine rewilding. As I have mentioned on the podcast before, I feel like in today's society, we as women have lost something intuitive and inherent within our bodies. As Krista so eloquently says on today's episode, we have industrialized birthing. And many of us are cut off from our internal wisdom in our day to day. We are cut off or castrated from our cyclical wisdom, our need as women to receive, to be mothered, even as mothers. And this conversation is a powerful exploration of what inner wisdom for us as women can really look and feel like. So I encourage you to, as you're listening to this, just sit with the words and see how some of what we're saying will feel in your body. I do want to add one thing. On today's episode, we definitely are, of course, as I mentioned, going to be talking about the power of breastfeeding. And there is some incredible research out there on the benefits of breastfeeding. And we do also touch on some of the common issues that women may face with breastfeeding and how to overcome them. That said, I want to acknowledge that not everyone will have the ability to or has had the ability to breastfeed for whatever reason. And so at the end of the day, know that a well-fed and loved baby is the most important thing. And so if breastfeeding is not part of your journey, or if this doesn't resonate, take what does, leave what doesn't. And at the end of the day, just choose what is right for you. Now, before we jump into the episode, I want to highlight a cool, incredible gift. In the show notes, you will find more information about Krista, of course, as we post information on all of our guests down there. But also, as a gift for this community, Krista is offering a discount code for her delicious coffee alternative. It is a adaptogenic cacao. It is perfect for anyone out there who's looking to cut out coffee or cut back, which is me actually right now for hormonal regulation purposes. I've completely cut out all coffee. So I'm really excited to try something that is a little bit less intense energy wise. And so go and check out the Earth Milk Moon cacao. You can see that in my show notes. And yeah, that's the last announcement. Now let's jump on into the episode. Krista, welcome to the other way.
Thanks, Kasha. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. We have a lot to cover, but before we dive into all the things, I would love for you to share with us what are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
I love that question. Passionate, grounded, and nurturing.
Mm. Definitely shows through. We've never met in person, even though we're kind of close. So maybe we will one day. But I feel like that definitely radiates with your online presence, which is nice to see. I love it. I love it when that happens. So you have a really interesting background because in a way, are merging all of this ancient wisdom, which I think as women, our bodies have been trained or like innately know some of this wisdom around birthing, around breastfeeding, but you're merging that with your background as a registered nurse because you're both a registered nurse, a lactation consultant, postpartum wellness provider, and a founder. I would love to start with your story. Like, how did you get so inspired to focus on postpartum care?
I was in nursing school and I remember doing my rotation in the mother infant unit at a county hospital where 70% of the population is non English speakers. And I remember going in as a student, not being around mothers or babies much at all in my life. And I remember helping this mother position her baby and helping her latch her baby on. And I left the room and it was almost like I had this full body remembrance that like, this is what I am being called to do. This is what I'm supposed to do in my life. And I don't know if I was a midwife in my past life or if I have midwives in my lineage, but it was just like a full body remembrance. And I'm like, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to help mothers and babies. It felt really important. So when I had worked in that hospital after I graduated, and about a year into my time there, I realized, is this all we do for mothers? Like we give them some tucks and some numbing spray and some pain medicine and send them home. And there's no support for them at home. And I was shocked by that because I could feel how baby's health and wellness was directly correlated to how well mother was doing. And I was like, there has to be a better way. So I started studying from midwife and studying ancient postpartum traditions all over the world. And I found that at one point, all of our lineages deeply centered mothers in the postpartum time. And there were certain prescriptive wellness advice, I guess, that was very revered in many of our cultures and traditions, where women would rest for a certain amount of time. They would be fed nourishing food. They were gently held by the community, knowing that if mothers are thriving, babies are thriving. And so I was working in the hospital and I worked in the hospital system in a few different hospitals for 10 years before I transitioned out of the hospital and started my holistic private postpartum practice. But it was through working in the hospital that I learned from all of these mothers. And I started doing outpatient lactation support and postpartum support while I was working in the hospital. And I could also see the correlation between our overly industrialized birth practices and how it impacts mothers and babies' health, both in the early postpartum time and in the long term postpartum time, and how it really impacted their bonding and their breastfeeding journey. And so I just really started studying the neurobiology of infants and pre and perinatal psychology and really getting interested in this matters. Like from preconception on, like it matters how well mom is. And so my focus in my adult life, I've really dedicated my adult life the last 15, 20 years to nurturing and mothering mothers, knowing the deep impact that that has on the health of our collective and the health of our individual selves and our family unit.
So powerful. I mean, the words that you said, like deeply mothering mothers, it is just so crazy to reflect on the fact that we have gone from a society where women were not asked to do this alone, right? Like where you conceive a baby, you birth said baby, and then you just go on with your days, right? Like just go on and know what to do and do it alone and be sleep deprived while you're recovering from this extremely difficult physical experience. It obviously makes so much sense to me, but when I reflect on how our lives are structured, it almost feels impossible today, right? Where we're all spread out and we have X amount of days of maternity leave if we have maternity leave. And then we're just like jumping back into our lives, expected to raise a child, be fully emotionally available for that child, physically available for that child. And yet we have so little support.
Yes. And then this makes mothers feel inadequate because
Mhm.
they are not able to, they innately know like they are not supposed to be disconnected from their baby. Our babies need us and they need our bodies, they need our milk. They literally need us to live, to co regulate for at least the first 9 months, at least, but really many, many years after birth. And so we have had to, or we have allowed ourselves to disconnect from our instincts. And our culture is very supportive of the disconnection.
This is huge because I have this thesis, and this is something I want to bring into the podcast season next year, actually, is that although we as women, and I think this is so important and so amazing, we have really stepped into our power in being viewed as equal to men. I also question the how behind how we got there and the outcome of how it looks today because there is this notion of okay, men and women are equal. Obviously, I fully believe that, but we're operating like little men. We are almost like castrating our instincts as mothers, as women, to really attune to the strengths that make us uniquely different. We're not exactly identical physiologically speaking, and we have these instincts, and as mothers, we're called to do these things that society is not really quite supporting, right? They're just
Yeah.
expecting us to bounce back and go back to our regular lives without that transition period at all or that support.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I would love to talk to you more about that
Yeah.
because I've witnessed families and like almost the detriment of portions of the feminism movement
Mm.
because of these like this hyper individualist culture that we live in and this like separation of our true essence as mothers. And like you said, it's like we're running as if it is summertime, like midsummer all the time. And I know that you really like your work is
Mhm.
focused on our natural cycles. And like, yeah, we're operating like it's summer all the time. And as if we are have this 24-hour testosterone cycle when that's not at all how mothers and women, and I know there's a better way. There's a better way.
Which is why what you're doing is so important. I think I shared right before we started recording, I'm on a early fertility journey. I'm curious, you were talking about the quote unquote industrialized birthing system. What are some things that women might be shocked to learn is perhaps maybe not normal, quote unquote? Like it doesn't make sense. This is not how women used to birth.
So our bodies are ancient. Our babies are ancient, right? Our physiologic and biologic design is still similar or the same as it was thousands of years ago, but our environment has changed completely. And birth was never looked at as a medical issue that needed to be intervened upon. Something that I think is important in the birth realm for women to know is that you don't need anybody to birth.
Whoa.
You don't need any, you really don't. But we have mothering and breastfeeding. These are learned behaviors. We are primates and we learn by watching. And when we are not around people birthing and breastfeeding and taking and mothering and taking care of their young, this is how we have forgotten. And so we need to surround ourselves with mothers who are breastfeeding or feeding our infants in the way that we want to feed our infants because we learn by watching. And oftentimes the first time we have held a baby or really touched our breasts or paid attention to our breasts or changed a diaper or had any kind of interaction with an infant is when we have our own. And at that point, that's a very late, it's very late, right? And so that can create that on top of all of the new neural connections that are being made in a mother's brain during that time, it can cause overwhelm. And it's no wonder we have such a huge rate of postpartum depression and anxiety in our culture. Like we have forgotten how to mother and we have forgotten how to breastfeed. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think something too that's really important for people to know before they have a baby is that infants are continual feeders. We are carry mammals, and there's amazing research, well documented, well researched work that anthropologists have done with different types of mammals. And we are considered carry mammals because our milk, our fat content in our milk is low. And so our infants need to continuously eat. And it's not, so we can't put them on a schedule. Yes.
Ooh.
And so that is really hard for our modern brains that want to stay in this really neocortex, like this very analytical part of our brain, this thinking part in the postpartum time. It's really like tuning into our babies, carrying our babies, letting them feed when they need to feed, when their brain tells them they need to eat, is going to create the most easeful, peaceful postpartum and breastfeeding experience. If we can really sink into that, knowing that like my baby literally needs my body to survive, and you're their home, you're their home. And so we can't put a baby in a snoo or a crib and expect them to be okay in the short and the long term when we know that we are designed biologically, physiologically, spiritually, energetically, hormonally to be connected to our mothers.
I think that's so powerful, so inconvenient for how we've structured our world. I
Yeah.
mean, that's such a reality, right? I actually got chills when I heard you say it that for a lot of women, myself included, I could tell you, could count on one hand the amount of times that I've held an infant. Truly, truly. I mean, I don't have kids yet, but it's just not something that I'm exposed to all the time. Like, I'm not surrounded by my family with sisters who have kids. And of course, we're based here in the Bay Area where women have children much later, typically, if they do at all. And so I'm not quite surrounded by that. And there is something I think just so jarring and shocking to go from, okay, I am an adult without children to suddenly this child's life depends on me. And I can absolutely understand and empathize with the pressure that a woman must feel. And of course, that just like identity transition in and of itself, I mean, it is absolutely a lot. And so I love that you named the fact that, well, it is normal to feel that overwhelm, and perhaps we existed differently back in the day, being actually exposed to mothers and children and infants, and that probably would have made things easier. For a lot of women, bringing awareness to the health of our breasts and even knowing anything about our breasts is kind of a foreign concept. I can't say if every woman feels this way, but I don't really pay attention to them that much. I had developed fibroadenomas at a younger age when I went on birth control. And so when I have hormonal imbalances, I'll sometimes have these like benign lumps. And so they've kind of been these, I guess, parts of my body that for the most part I ignore unless I'm a little panicked as to what's happening there. And then suddenly I can imagine going from that stage to trying to breastfeed and there being quite a huge gap of trying to understand and connect to my breasts. So I would love to start by getting a little bit of background for women out there who perhaps feel that disconnection. How should we think about breast health? I know you're very passionate about the energetics of the breast. So could you talk a bit about that?
Yes. So our breasts, it is no accident that our breasts are on top of our hearts and are an extension of our hearts. And so when we are having breast function or breast dis-ease of any type, the first place that I go with clients, with myself, with women, are check in with your heart and check in with your heart because and where do you need support? Where in your life are you lacking support? Because our breasts are on our chests. This is where we give. We give to our babies, we give to our families, we give to our lovers, we give to our work, we give so much. And for thriving life to occur, there needs to be an energetic reciprocity of giving and receiving. And if we are giving too much without receiving enough, we are going to experience dis-ease and we are going to experience dysfunction. And it oftentimes our breasts are the first place that lets us know, hey, there's something going on in here. And I want to signal to you to start tuning in. And so I really feel like if you can just connect to your heart first and feel into that, then that is where breast health starts. It's tuning into our hearts. And then our breasts, are are amazing. Like they really are. One of my mentors once told me our breasts are like the canary in the coal mines. In the coal mines, they used to release the canary bird, and the canary would let them know if it was too toxic for humans to go in by signaling that they were distressed. And so that is what our breasts do for us. And they are full of lymphatic fluid and lymphatic tissue. And this is a really important part of our lymph system, which is our detoxification system. So, literally, just touching our breasts and moving them and getting to know the landscape of your own breasts will empower you. And it is so much more useful than doing like a monthly breast check, right? That we've been taught in the Western medical field, we've been taught to check your breasts once a month. We have 4 cycles as women, and our breasts change throughout that entire cycle. So, really getting to know your breasts throughout each of your cycle will be so helpful. You would be the first to know if anything changes or if there needs to be any attention given to those. So, really tuning in with your heart, even if it's just for a moment, those check ins, and then touching your breasts and getting to know the landscape of your breasts. And really, there's no right or wrong way to do it. I do feel like lymph drainage is very important for women. And so understanding those points where our lymph drain, which is right under our clavicle bones and in our armpits, are 2 areas in our chest where it drains, and really just like giving it some love, like massaging gently. Our lymph system sits right underneath our skin. So we don't need to do anything deep. It's a very tender area that needs gentleness. So just really gentle, even like holding your breasts and just doing like circular motion out of the shower and just like moving them. I had this acupuncturist who is a mentor of mine, and she said that after a shower, she would bend over and just kind of like gently slap her breast to get blood flow there and to move them. Our lymph system doesn't have in our breasts, it doesn't have muscles that will move it like other areas of our body. And we also don't, the lymph system doesn't have a pump. So, like our heart has, or our circulatory system has our heart to pump it. Our lymph system doesn't have that. And so we have to move it. And so gentle movement is what is going to help move our lymph system and detoxify our breasts.
I love the analogy of the canary because I'm reflecting on, even in my own experience, how I can always see if something is a bit off based on how my cycle and the lead up to my cycle feels. And the very first signal will always be sore or tender breasts. I wasn't even aware that our breasts were part of our lymph system. You make such an important point that there isn't a circulatory system there to kind of like push things around the way the heart can move the blood through our body. And that movement is just so important to prevent the stagnation.
It's so empowering, right? To know, like, oh, I can do things to prevent stagnation, to prevent toxin buildup. And it's your hands, it's touch and movement. Breath work is also a really good way to move lymph fluid. And our breast tissue, I just want to mention this, it goes all the way up into our armpits and it extends like further up into our toward our clavicles and toward our sternum than you can see, than you can visually see. So just rubbing all of that area gently. And you may notice, like if you do notice, like, during the luteal phase of my cycle, I am, like you were saying, like getting breast tenderness like, right before. And it's nice to think back into what your diet was like that in your when you were ovulating or, during those previous phases. Because sometimes I have found like, okay, my breasts are tender. What was I doing? And I'm like, oh, I ate way more sugar than I normally do. Sugar is a huge one for me, where I'm like, oh, that causes breast tenderness. So it's obviously throwing off something in my body that's not in balance.
Yeah. I think it's so powerful because as a society, and I definitely will speak through my own experience, there's like a, intentional, I'm gonna call it castration from all these sensations in our bodies. We are taught to ignore them, we are taught to take a pill to just mask all of the symptoms, yet each of these signals are actually so powerful. There's almost like this need for rewilding that needs to happen for women, truly, for us to actually get in tune with this. Our breasts have historically always been sexualized, and there's something I think so uncomfortable about almost like I think that there is a transition of starting to look at them differently and care for them, not just view them as this like sexual object that is very attractive in this way or that way, or this version is attractive but a differently looking pair of breasts is not. I mean, that in and of itself is a whole journey. I think just starting to accept your breasts as they are and give them that self-love and that touch. I almost feel like if it feels a little uncomfortable, it's probably even more important to do because we're so detached from that aspect of ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. That
Yeah.
is important.
For women who are new mothers and are embarking on this breastfeeding journey, I would love for you to share what can women expect? The reality is that a lot of women struggle with breastfeeding.
Yes, I would say that most mother baby dyads have challenges to work through in the beginning and or at any part of their breastfeeding journey. So those little snippets that you see on social media of breastfeeding are so beautiful and they are a snippet in time, right? Babies breastfeed 8 to 12 times a day oftentimes, sometimes more, sometimes less. But there's a lot going on there and mothers and babies are fully connected physiologically, hormonally, psychologically, spiritually. And so when any part of that, though one of those bodies gets dysregulated, it can dysregulate that whole process. And so I think something that's really important to know is like we can use our really thinking part of our brain, like that neocortex part of our brain, to help us to prepare for some of these challenges that could arise and to just understand, really using it as an education to understand how lactation works. And if we understand how lactation works, then we will know when to reach out for help because we will know it's normal. Right. And so I think I want to teach your listeners that there are two main hormones involved in lactation. There's lots of hormones, but these two are two that I think are important to know just on a foundational level. And one is prolactin. Prolactin is our milk making hormone. It is released from our brain, from the pituitary gland of our brain, and it's released when babies suckle and when milk is removed. The more frequent milk removal, the more milk you'll make. And then oxytocin is the other hormone that's very involved in lactation and breastfeeding. That is the hormone that releases milk from the breast. And the way that that is released is when we feel good, when we feel supported and we feel loved and seen and heard. And when we have a baby skin to skin on our chest, oxytocin is released. And we need both prolactin and oxytocin in balance for lactation to work. And in our modern culture, we really are trying to outsource some of that and it doesn't work. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of even pediatricians and obstetricians, people who are telling mothers, like, you need to sleep. You need to sleep for your mental health. Yes, we know that sleep is important. Mother's brain changes when they have babies to be able to function on much less sleep and more broken sleep. So we can't skip feeds or have a night nurse come in and take care of our baby for the night so we can sleep all night. Because if our prolactin, right, if milk is not being removed regularly, our bodies are so wise. They're going to say, oh, I don't have to make any more milk because it's not being removed. So there's no baby to feed. So what happens is our milk supply starts dropping. And then that's when mothers are like, I didn't have enough milk for my baby. But oftentimes it's just a lack of understanding of how these hormones work and the importance of having your baby near you and close to you because you are not separate.
I absolutely love that you mentioned this. You just made a comment about the fact that, yes, our brains change. There has been such an emphasis on the right amount of time for sleep that I think it can be very, in a way, there's like an element of fear if I'm not getting enough, what's happening to my body. And I think it's so important to name that this period of time after birth is a temporary one and that our bodies have evolved to support that and to trust in that, I think is really powerful. What would you recommend for women to do? Because at the same time, this period is a very taxing one for our bodies. So if we're not sleeping through the night because we're getting up or we're feeding our babies every couple of hours, what do you recommend women do during this period of time to support themselves?
Okay, so what you said is getting up every couple hours, right?
Yeah.
And that's what wakes us up is the getting up. But what I really recommend, and this is something that I help virtually and in person with my clients, is I help them set up a safe co-sleeping situation where the baby is near them. And when
Mm.
baby knows that their mother is near and they can hear you breathe and you can hear your baby breathe, you both can sleep better. So we need our babies near us. Our babies need to be near us to be able to get into that, to feel safe enough to get into a deep sleep. And when they need to eat, instead of getting up, you can just bring your baby to you. And I really find it valuable and important for mothers to have an IBCLC or a lactation consultant come and show them these laid back and like lying down breastfeeding positions. So you're not getting up. And in the early days, sometimes as you're learning and baby's learning to latch, you need to sit up and use all the pillows and things. But as lactation and breastfeeding become more comfortable and just a part of your flow, that's when learn those lying down positions so you don't have to get up and the whole family will get more sleep. So I
Mm.
am a huge, huge promoter of safe co-sleeping and safe bed sharing.
What would you recommend for women who are listening to this and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot imagine this being my reality." We'll present 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is it's still pretty early after the birth and they're finding themselves struggling to get into a deep sleep, because I definitely know some women who mention that when the baby's in the room, the noises that the baby makes just kind of wake me up and I can't sleep through the night. What would you recommend for somebody like that?
The way that I work with mothers on that kind of challenge is where in your life, whether it's during the day or at night, do you need more support?
Mm.
So sometimes it can be a nutrient deficiency that is preventing them from getting good sleep.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's, again, checking into the heart space. Are you getting enough support at home? Do you have a supportive partner? Do you need to call in your layers of support? Your family, friends? Are you hungry? Are you getting enough food? That's a huge one. Oftentimes when I have moms who are having insomnia when baby's asleep and then they just can't sleep still, having postpartum depression and anxiety, when you start digging into, okay, what kind of support is lacking in your life, oftentimes nutrients is a huge
Mhm.
one because we are forgetting to eat. It's easy to forget to eat when you are busy feeding another human. And so sometimes moms will call me and they're like, I have postpartum blues. What can I do? I'm like, when was the last time you ate? And they're like, oh, dinner last night, which was 13 hours ago, and you're breastfeeding all night. So you're giving and giving and giving, and your body is receiving nothing. So,
Mhm.
so that is the first way I would approach that is, what do the days look like? What do your days look like? What does your nutrients look like? What does your support look like?
And for women who are transitioning back to work, let's say they were lucky enough to have maternity leave and now they're transitioning back to working. What would you recommend in cases like that? They're trying to balance working during the day and breastfeeding and sleeping enough.
Yes, this is really common, really hard, really sad in our culture
Yeah.
that that's actually the reality that so many of our mothers have to face, where they actually contemplate disconnection from their babies and they have to physically disconnect from their babies, which is completely overriding their instincts and their intuition
Yeah.
oftentimes. I think it's really important for mothers to connect to a support group or connect to a mother's group or even a lactation consultant, someone who can hold space for them to process that grief. It doesn't always feel like grief to mothers, but oftentimes it does. And so just holding that space to be like, okay, this is happening and it is valid that you feel this way and it's not right. It's not right that you don't have the support to the financial support or the or cultural support to stay home with your baby, because just disconnecting from our baby is never the answer. It
Mhm.
never is. So when mothers do go back to work, and oftentimes I'm working with moms on creating a pumping and breastfeeding plan that will keep their milk supply up and keep baby fed so they don't have to give formula or any other kind of infant food so baby can stay on their breast milk. And there are beautiful ways to do that. There really are. And babies are going to need you even more when they aren't with you during the day. So my encouragement is to connect deeply to baby when you get home and to breastfeed on demand, continual breastfeed from when you get home through the night till the next morning. And oftentimes moms find that when they surrender and they sink into the connection and sink into this really sacred period of time in their life and in babies' lives and know like this is so finite, this is so temporary that the exhaustion part of it and being tired is something that they can get through as long as they're getting that oxytocin from that mother baby connection and they're getting the support that they need in other ways, the nourishment and yeah, the community support.
So, what about women who struggle with breastfeeding, not from a physiological point of view, but from an emotional point of view? So, I've definitely had friends who reached out and they were like, Kasha, every time I breastfeed, I feel so depressed. Like it's like draining on their bodies and they emotionally are struggling with that.
Well, there is actually a syndrome and it's called DMERS. And it's actually like when the oxytocin release happens, when a letdown occurs, they actually have an emotional response to that. And it's a spectrum. So sometimes women feel like super, super depressed. And sometimes people feel really anxious. Sometimes people just start feeling like a feeling of due and then it goes away as I continue breastfeeding. So it's really, that one is really, really interesting. And we don't know why that happens. I'm really hoping that there's more research being done on this. I think there is, but we do not know why it happens. And I have my own theories on that. And oftentimes, again, like when we start digging into the heart space and into things that are going on in the mother's life, or maybe past traumas to the body, to the breast, to mother as a child, we can oftentimes help mom help expose that, reveal that, and heal that. And it really helps with the DMERS or some of those feelings that come up during the letdown. And it's fascinating. I really love holding mothers who are experiencing that because it's hard. That's a hard thing to
Yeah.
experience when you're nurturing your baby.
Yeah. It must feel so complex, the kind of desire to breastfeed, but also the struggle with it. I do appreciate that you're bringing up the fact that perhaps there's something deeper there that can also be healed if it is coming up, which I think is really really powerful. I must ask, there are women out there who probably have worked with you, and as incredible as you are, they're unable to breastfeed. I want to breastfeed, but I can't. What would
Yeah,
you advise in those situations?
I do work with mothers like that, and there are a small percentage of mothers where there is a hormonal imbalance or a physiologic imbalance in mom or an anatomical challenge in baby where breastfeeding is really hard or breastfeeding mom doesn't make milk because of that. It's a small percentage of people, but it does happen. In those situations, I always recommend more skin to skin. Like feed
Mm,
baby however you're feed baby close to your body, feed baby on your skin, still be the one to feed your baby when you can,
mhm,
as much as you can. Look in baby's eyes when you're feeding them, connect to them. Like you can still deeply, deeply connect to your baby and nurture their nervous system. The emotional part of their brain is growing tremendously for the first 3 years. And so that connection, that eye contact, that body connection, them smelling you, that is what grows that emotional aspect of the brain.
when we are breastfeeding or when we are having that skin to skin contact, what is happening for mother and for baby? We talked about the physiology of breastfeeding and the hormones that are being released, which I think is actually so helpful to get to the first principles of that. But then beyond, what is happening when we are actually breastfeeding or feeding our babies or having that skin to skin contact?
The hormones that are released during that skin to skin contact are what helps trigger the brain and vice versa to change. So that helps our brains to rewire new neural connections to be able to meet the demands of motherhood and mothering.
Wow.
Yeah. So the more time that we spend with our babies close to us and in stillness and connection with our babies, not being on our phones while we're connecting to them, especially in those early months, is so helpful because it's helping your brain to rewire itself to be able to meet the demands of mothering so it's not so overwhelming. So, in those early weeks and months, while your brain is rewiring itself, it is overwhelming. And the best thing to do is to pause, to be still and allow all the things to come up, because that in the sacred postpartum time, that is when all of our old wounding comes up, all of our old traumas come up, and literally being still while you're being held, while mother is being mothered, being still with your baby is what helps heal, that is what helps your brain to create new neural connections to adjust to mothering. And it's usually around 3 or 4 months where moms are like, I feel like I could go to a postpartum support group now, or I'm ready to go and like connect to other people. All of a sudden, there's that shift. And so if we can rest and if we can cocoon and just connect to our babies while our brain is going through that process, it's going to set you up for a more easeful mothering journey through the other trimesters, right?
Mhm.
I think there's so many phases of mothering and matrescence, but that's what's happening in mother's brain. And then
Wow.
baby's brain is also doing a similar thing where it's like, babies are, their emotional brain is developing in those first 3 years. And that nurturing that emotional brain is setting your baby up for a lifetime of healthy relationships and nervous system resiliency. So it is so refreshing to me, at least, to know like, okay, I don't need to like teach my babies all these things. I just need to love them, connect to them, and let them know that they're safe. And that is what's going to create the foundation for their intellectual brain to process and their social brain to feel safe with other people.
That is so powerful. First of all, I think for all the women that are listening to this podcast, there's just such a beautiful reminder of the fact that as women, our lives every single month and also throughout our lives really they do exist in the context of cycles, right? And I think you spoke to that so beautifully that that period of postpartum time is something that is a finite period of time and it's not forever. And I think there's just something so special and so beautiful and so wise about our bodies that we're able to actually adjust how much sleep we need or how our bodies function to meet the needs of that time. And it is almost like a just a cycle that is fleeting, that is in that we as women get to experience. And I think that's actually quite beautiful when we look at it that way, because I think that there's a lot of languaging around just bouncing back and getting back to where you were and being exactly the way that you were. But I honestly find that pretty impossible. You are not the same person that you were before you gave birth. And that's not to say that now the new version is in some ways lesser than the other version. It's just different. And there are so many gifts that come with that. And so I love that you named that for women because I can imagine the overwhelm that must come with that transition and that period of time.
Yes, yes, that's it. That's it. It's a season and it's a beautiful opportunity to really let it transform you. Let it transform you. Don't fight the transformation. Don't fight all the things that are coming up. Be with it. Be with your baby and allow it to change you. I really feel like the postpartum season, those first few years really are like a winter, an inner winter. So it's a time to just like cocoon, and it can be dark. It can be dark. It can be challenging, but there's so much magic in it, and allowing ourselves to be in it and to stay soft in it and not harden ourselves to all the feelings coming up and to the help that we need. Allowing ourselves to receive is it's so beautiful. And it's one of the reasons I love working in the postpartum space. It's such an honor to be invited into that space because it is a beautiful, magical, transformational space.
You're making me think of something quite beautiful in so I studied Chinese medicine for 2 years. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about Chinese medicine, like foundational theory, is yin and yang, right? Where yang is that kind of fire energy, doing, energetically masculine, not from a necessarily gender point of view, but just energetically, like very masculine in nature. Yin being receptive, kind of the dark to the light. And there's something so beautiful because yin is inherently very feminine, energetically speaking, and it's known as like a very receptive has a receptive nature. So like yin organs in the body are the receptive organs versus the yang organs like the stomach are like the digestive and the doing organs. And I think that as women, and I'll speak for myself, but there is almost like this resistance to being taken care of and receiving. I think for a lot of women there is a struggle there, right? We're taught to do and to kind of put our stake in the ground productively, but there's just something so beautiful about almost seeing the reception or the support that we can get flow through us to the children that we're mothering. There's just something so powerful about that too, about receiving and then giving to the child who also now receives. And I think that's just such a powerful reframe. If we can really see it from that perspective as well, to be hopefully it might inspire a bit more of that surrender to receiving, which I know can be really difficult for people.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
And I really encourage your listeners to practice receiving during the bleeding time of your cycle.
Ooh,
Receiving during that time. So then when you are postpartum, it doesn't feel so foreign. And you're like, I felt this before when I've needed it, when I'm tired, when I've needed more nourishment than normal. So that it's a really good time to practice that receiving and asking for help or taking a day off or whatever it is that you need. And then also I just want to touch on like our physical bodies sometimes are really hard to let go of as women in a culture who beautifies this more Barbie figure.
yeah.
And yeah, and beautiful about a soft postpartum body. Like we are supposed to be soft. And I think our physical body is representing the energy that we are supposed to be embodying during that time too. Like we're supposed to be soft. Like there's a reason our bodies are soft postpartum. Like babies love our softness. They need our softness. And I think, and we do too. Like we need that.
I love that for all of us. I feel like we've definitely seen more celebration of the baby bump in the last few years, but I would love to see a celebration of that postpartum softness. I think there's something so special about that. And the feminine has flow, right? Like it feels like there's more wave to it. It doesn't need to be like rigid and stagnant and like totally structurally defined. That's our inner patriarchy talking. That's my theory. And I'm going to stick to that. I mean, Krista, I could speak with you for hours, but we're already over time. So I would just love if you could share with our audience where can people find you, anything you want to announce that you have coming up, and I will link everything below so you don't have to spell it out. This was such a great conversation.
So good. I loved our conversation. Thank you. So you can find me at earthmilkmoon.com and on Instagram at earthmilkmoon. And I do virtual lactation support. I oftentimes work with people through pregnancy. So we meet every week of pregnancy through the postpartum time. And it's so beautiful. And they also offer mentorship for people who want to go into this work, which has been so fun. I am myself cocooning this winter, this December. So I don't have any events or anything coming up, but I will announce any classes or courses that I'm doing in the beginning of the year.
Love it. Well, I cannot wait to stay attuned to that. And Krista, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you too. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into The Other Way. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I'm ever so grateful. If you want to stay connected, you can find information on how in our show notes. And finally, if you're curious about inflow and want free resources around cyclical living or moon cycles, check out inflowplanner.com. And of course, for all my listeners, you can use the code podcast10 for 10% off any purchase. All right, that's all for today. See you next time.